I saw 11 movies at Tribeca this year, and here's how I'd rank them. Number 11 is Happy Hours Part 1. I feel bad about how much I dislike this movie because I feel like Katie Holmes and I would get along because she opened the movie with a quote from one of my favorite books, the characters listened to Blondie, and she clearly drew inspiration from the Before trilogy. So that's three of my favorite things. But honestly, the only reason why I didn't walk out of this movie was because I had 3 screenings lined up in the same auditorium that day, so there was no point in leaving when my next movie was in the same auditorium. This just felt like more of a Lifetime or Hallmark movie to me. It's about reconnecting with your first love, and for a film about memory, I didn't find it particularly memorable. I'd only recommend it if you're a huge Dawson's Creek fan and want to see a little mini reunion. Number 10 is Only What We Carry. This movie's got a great cast, but the screenplay was mostly improvised and it shows. I'm not saying an improvised script is a bad thing. I love plenty of films with improvised scripts. But this movie just felt very meandering, and I thought the chemistry, emotion, and tension were all lacking. I'd only recommend it if you want to watch Quentin Tarantino talk to a tree like Mark Wahlberg in The Happening. Number 9 is Humpty Dumpty X, a documentary about the making of American History X directed by Tony Kaye himself. It's extremely one-sided, but honestly, I've never seen anything like it. I can't say I fully enjoyed it, but I often found myself staring at the screen in disbelief because Tony Kaye is just so unapologetically himself. He recorded all the behind-the-scenes chaos of the post-production process of American History X, and this film also includes phone calls, candid conversations, and some wild creative rants. It doesn't paint a complete picture of the production process for American History X because it's entirely from Kaye's perspective. It does, however, offer a holistic portrait of Tony Kaye as an artist. This feels like a self-portrait in documentary form. I'd recommend this one if you're a huge fan of Tony Kaye and/or American History X. Number 8 is Cotton Fever. Please keep in mind that this is my personal ranking. This movie actually won multiple awards at Tribeca. I've just seen a lot of addiction dramas in my lifetime, so I need them to do something a little more to stand out. But you could feel how personal this was for the filmmaker and that he drew from his own experiences. It addresses the topic of addiction from all angles through an ensemble cast and interwoven storylines involving the challenges of maintaining sobriety, the realities of homelessness, and the difficulties faced by those trying to help. I'd recommend this one if you're a fan of addiction dramas, especially the small indie ones. Number 7 is Doc Meets World, the documentary about Pod Meets World. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. The only reason why it's not higher up on my list is because I don't think it has universal appeal. This is very much for fans of Boy Meets World and/or Pod Meets World. I'm not a big podcast person, but I grew up with Boy Meets World and have a lot of sentimental attachment to the show, so this was very nostalgic for me. And I just love the way it explores how each of these actors felt the need to distance themselves from the show, but they eventually found their way back to each other. I'd recommend this one if you're a fan of Boy Meets World. Speaking of films that won't have universal appeal, number 6 is Imaginal Disk. This is the visual companion to Magdalena Bay's concept album of the same name. So if you're not a fan of Magdalena Bay or Amanda Kramer's eccentric filmmaking, then you probably won't enjoy this one. I said it feels like watching the Teletubbies while under the influence of LSD, and I wasn't saying that to try to be funny, I genuinely meant it. It's a wacky, chaotic explosion of color and absurdity and a surreal tale of self-discovery. If you're looking for a cohesive, easy-to-follow narrative, you won't have a good time. But if you enjoy looking at peculiar visuals and dancing along to synth pop, I thought it was fun. I'd recommend it if you're a Magdalena Bay fan or if you just enjoy visual albums and abstract psychedelic vibes. Number 5 is The Tropic Sun and His Eyes. It's a heartwarming film about reconciliation, masculinity, mental health, and generational trauma. It's also a visually stunning love letter to Haiti, its people, and its culture. The music and performances are fantastic. It's a pretty simple story. A man returns to Haiti to reconnect with his estranged father, and a street kid starts following him, and it turns into this unlikely companion road movie of sorts. It's a patient, quietly moving directorial debut. I'd recommend this one if you're a fan of films like Moonlight, The Last Black Man in San Francisco, My Father's Shadow, and Kikujiro. Speaking of patient, quietly moving directorial debuts, number 4 is Memorizu, which is a moving meditation on memory. It follows a man whose father-in-law fractures his leg and needs help running his traditional photo studio. So the man travels to his town to help out, which means he's away from his wife and child for 60 days. And he and his wife exchange photos and videos to stay connected. So it creates this intriguing contrast between traditional photography and digital images. It relies more on imagery, mood, and atmosphere than narrative momentum. So some people may find it too dull because not much really happens, but it also feels like a poetic statement about how the smaller moments of our lives accumulate into something meaningful over time. There's a stillness and slowness to it that serves as a gentle reminder to cherish the little things because these moments will all be memories someday. I'd recommend this one if you're a fan of films like Tokyo Story, Drive My Car, After the Storm, Blue Heron, and After Sun. Number 3 is Sad Girls. This is like Sorry Baby for teenagers, but not so much of a comedy. It's about female friendship, processing trauma, and trying to heal and push forward. Part of what made this one compelling to me is that it focuses more on the best friend's perspective. So we see the mix of emotions as this girl finds out something horrible happened to her best friend, the rage she feels toward the perpetrator, the guilt she feels and the way she blames herself, feeling like it's somehow her fault, and the confusion and hopelessness of wanting to help this person who means so much to you but not knowing what to do. And the thing that stood out most to me is how it explores the complexities of consent, how it's possible to be assaulted by someone you're attracted to and wanted to be with. I feel like that's something that needs to be discussed more. I'd recommend this one if you enjoyed films like Sorry Baby, I Used to Be Funny, and Speak. Number 2 is Bob and David Climb Machu Picchu. This movie is exactly what it sounds like. It's a documentary about the friendship between Bob Odenkirk and David Cross. Naturally, it's a pretty funny movie, but it also has some surprising moments of sincerity as they reflect on aging and mortality, because shortly before they embark on this trip, Bob Odenkirk suffered a heart attack. This will definitely appeal to fans of Mr. Show, but I think it could win over people who aren't even familiar with any of their work because their friendship is just so funny and endearing. It's almost like a documentary version of the trip. I'd recommend this one to fans of Mr. Show, fans of Bob Odenkirk, fans of David Cross, and anyone who just thinks it'd be funny to watch a couple of comedians climb Machu Picchu. And my number 1 is Mineshaft, The Cruising Murders. If you've seen the movie Cruising, whether you loved it or hated it, I think this documentary is an absolute must-see. If you haven't seen Cruising, maybe watch that first and then decide if you want to check out this documentary. But I thought this was such a well-crafted film. You know how I said the American History X documentary was one-sided? This is the opposite of that. It captures all different perspectives on the film. And for those who don't know, Cruising was partially inspired by a real-life murder. And what makes it even more fascinating is that Cruising was directed by William Friedkin, who also directed The Exorcist. And the man who was murdered was a film reporter for Variety and wrote about The Exorcist. And the man who committed the murder appeared in The Exorcist. So there are a lot of layers to this story. On top of the story that inspired the film, Cruising itself had such an intriguing production process, reception, and legacy. Members of the queer community conducted protests because they saw its depiction of homosexuality as harmful, but it was also one of the first mainstream films to explore this particular subculture, so for some people it was like a sexual awakening of sorts. So there's a lot of nuance there. Someone can say this movie's portrayal of homosexuality is offensive, but at the same time they could say it was also my introduction to the leather scene or my first time seeing people like me in a movie. So this documentary feels like a mix of true crime investigation, film criticism, and a record of queer cultural history. I recommend it to anyone who's ever watched the movie Cruising.